The Cascade Woods stretch for thousands of miles along the Pacific Northwest. Dense, ancient, and unforgiving. Park rangers refuse to patrol certain trails after dark. Hikers vanish on well-marked paths. Search parties find evidence that makes no sense. Camps that shouldn't exist. Voices that mimic the living, and things in the trees that watch. What you're about to hear comes from people who went into those woods and encountered something they can't explain. Some made it out. Others were never the same. And a few are still out there, walking trails that have no end. Welcome to Verified Fears. Before we begin, if you're fascinated by true accounts of the unexplained and the terrifying reality lurking in places we think we know, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Because every week, we bring you stories that will make you question what's really out there. Now, let's step into the Cascade Woods and hear from those who survived to tell their tale. I never used to be afraid of the woods. I grew up with trail maps tacked to my wall, my boots muddy and my pack worn thin. I always thought the real danger was losing your footing, not your mind. That was before last summer, when I drove out to a lesser-known trail in the Cascades, eager for 3 days away from everything human. I remember the sky was the kind of gray that makes the world feel smaller, pressing the clouds right down onto the pine tops. I watched the tree line swallow my car, then turned off my phone and dropped it into the bottom of my bag. I would regret that later, in ways I still don't know how to put into words. The trail started muggy and lush, the kind of thick summer air that clings even in the shade. I remember tracing the heel prints of whoever had been there before me. Wearing boots, big ones, always just ahead. Always a few hours old. Sometimes I'd catch a whiff of wood smoke that vanished if I tried to chase it. That first day was uneventful. I set up my small tent in a hollow between old fir trees. By nightfall, only birds, the chattering rush of the creek kept me company. I should mention that smell, though, right before sundown. A faint, earthy scent, not quite decay, not pine sap. Something like turned soil, raw and unsettled. I chalked it up to the wet rot in the roots. I woke up to silence. I don't mean the kind you hope for, the sleepy hush of the deep woods. I mean a complete muteness. No birds, no wind. Just the scrape of my own sleeping bag every time I shifted. Even then, with sunrise filtering silver through the mesh, I felt like I was underwater. I forced myself up, splashed creek-cold water on my face, and shouldered my pack, determined not to let nerves spoil the trip. That's when I saw the first cairn. Stones stacked thigh-high in the middle of the trail, carefully balanced, with small objects tucked into the gaps. A button? The broken arm off some plastic toy? Animal bones whittled sharp. I paused, waiting for the skin-prickling chill to pass. But it didn't. The air felt heavier here, the world more narrow. I knelt to study the cairn, each stone caked in lichen, none from the creek nearby. I told myself it was a local's marker or an old trail sign left by a forgotten hiker. I stepped off the trail to pass it, head down. 2 hours later, I found a second cairn. This one smaller, but somehow pointed, stones wedged at odd angles, the whole thing canted toward the trees. I took photos, more out of routine than curiosity, and sent a voice memo to myself. Weird markers. If I see a third, I'm out. My own attempt at a joke sounded thin in the still air. The third cairn showed up at lunchtime. Now, the woods had shifted. The light was wrong. Sun stripes came down, but didn't touch the moss. My canteen felt lighter in my hand, my feet heavier. It wasn't just the markers. It was the way each cairn grew less like a hiker's stack and more like a message. Stones in a spiral, a little rabbit skull balanced on the apex. No prints around it but mine. I should have turned back then, but pride and that old explorer's urge kept me pressing forward. My map was useless. There were offshoots, hoofed trails, twitching deer runs where no trail was marked. I kept to the widest path and tried not to look for patterns in the clearing fog. By late afternoon, I saw the cairns more frequently. Always bigger, always stranger. Some had bits of clothing twisted into the base, a torn sleeve, shreds of blue tarpaulin. Some had old rust-flecked cutlery compressed into the stones so you'd have to wrench them out with both hands. Soon, the cairns grew closer together until they marked a path that turned away from the main trail, curling deeper into the wood's thickest shadow. You ever feel watched? Not just watched, but measured. Your breath counted and your pulse weighed. That's how it felt when I ducked beneath a low branch and saw the cairn spiral for the first time. It was a clearing cut with impossible precision. 11 cairns forming a near-perfect spiral. The space in the center cleared of everything, even moss. Just black, churned earth, ringed by standing stones. My tongue went dry in my mouth. The scent of disturbed dirt was overwhelming, sickly sweet, almost like overripe fruit gone sour. I thought about turning back, I really did. But some part of me wanted to see the middle. Call it curiosity, call it compulsion. I found myself walking the spiral, left foot after right, the hush closing around me. With every step, the woods seemed to lean in. The trees pressed closer. My skin crawled. At the center of the spiral was a hole, a shallow pit, just big enough for one, covered with a thin lattice of branches. My breath steamed in the air, though the temperature hadn't dropped. Something under those branches caught my eye. A glint of silver, a flick of blue fabric. I bent, and as I reached forward, the ground trembled just once, the way earth does before thunder. I snatched my hand away, heart hammering. The wind picked up, but only enough to move the branches, to let something slip deeper out of sight. That's when I heard it. The sound of gravel shifting, not 6 feet behind me. I straightened and turned. Nothing but the trees, needles shifting. Then a cough, a rough scrape of breath, not quite human. My fists clenched around my walking stick. I told myself it was an animal. I told myself anything. Then the voice. You're late. If terror has a taste, it is dry and sharp, like swallowing winter. I backed away from the hole, all my senses straining. I called out, asked who was there. Each word died small and hollow. The woods absorbed everything. The spiral was different now. Where I'd entered, a new cairn stood, blocking the way. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking. Someone followed, someone placed it. But I hadn't heard so much as a twig snap. And when I looked back at the center, the pit was gone. Just churned earth. No trace of the branches, no glint of blue fabric. Panic set in. My feet tangled with roots as I tried to pick another way out. The woods didn't make sense anymore. Every direction was wrong. The cairns closed in, forming a corridor. I stumbled down twisted paths, the sensation of being herded growing stronger with each step. The woods pressed tighter, strange whistling sounds running through the needles. Not birds, not wind. More like something alive, exhaling, layering beneath my own frantic breaths. When I finally crashed back onto the main trail, the air shifted back to normal. A wind snapped through the trees, birdsong erupted, and just for a second, I could hear distant laughter, almost human, almost welcoming. The path was clear behind me. No cairns, no pit, nothing but my footprints and torn moss. You think you're safe once you reach your car. You think the grip of the woods lets go. But back at home, bits of earth kept turning up. In my backpack, in my boots. One rock, polished gray, on my nightstand each time I woke up shivering. Not my rock, not one I'd carried. The scent, the hush, the cold followed. Even now, telling you this, I swear I see the shadow of cairns in the corner of my room just before sleep pulls me under. If you plan to hike the Cascade woods, remember the cairns. Don't walk the spiral. And never, ever look for what's buried at its center. Some paths follow you home. Some stories, once you step into them, never really end. Let me tell you about something that happened in 1987, back when the Cascade Woods still felt conquerable, back when we thought we understood what lurked between those trees. This isn't my story. It belongs to the search and rescue teams who were there, to the family who lost their son for 3 days, and most of all, to the boy himself. Though I'm not sure he ever really came back. It was late August, the tail end of summer when families squeeze in one last camping trip before school starts. The Hendersons, Tom, Marie, and their 7-year-old son Michael, picked a campground deep in the Cascades, the kind of place where cell service was a myth and the ranger station was a 40-minute drive on logging roads. They'd camped there before. Michael knew the trails, knew not to wander. That's what made it so impossible when he vanished. It happened during the golden hour, that soft time before dinner when parents relax and kids burn off their last burst of energy. Tom was at the fire ring, Marie unpacking supplies from the cooler. Michael had been collecting pine cones 20 feet away, humming some cartoon theme song. Tom glanced up to check on him. Every parent does that automatic look. And Michael was gone, not walking away, not hidden behind a tree, just gone, like the forest had inhaled him. The panic was immediate. They searched the campsite, calling his name until their voices cracked. Other campers joined in, forming lines, sweeping through the underbrush. By nightfall, the rangers arrived with dogs and radios, and that tight-lipped professionalism that never quite hides the fear. The dogs picked up Michael's scent, heading east, away from the trails. Deeper into old-growth forest, where the canopy chokes out the sky. I want you to understand what 3 days means in those woods. 3 days of cold nights and no shelter. 3 days without food or water. 3 days for a 7-year-old boy who'd never spent a night away from his parents. The search parties pushed deeper each day, covering miles of terrain. They found nothing, no clothing, no footprints, no sign he'd ever existed. The forest swallowed evidence the way it swallows sound. On the 3rd day, a ranger named Bill McKenna was searching a sector they'd already covered twice. He told me years later that he almost didn't go back, that something about that particular grove made his skin crawl. The trees there grew different, twisted, their bark scarred in patterns that looked almost deliberate. The air sat heavy and still, like the woods were holding their breath. But he went anyway, because that's what you do when a child is missing. You go back. You always go back. He found Michael sitting cross-legged in a clearing, surrounded by a perfect circle of mushrooms, the kind locals call fairy rings. The boy was clean, not just alive, but pristine, like he'd just stepped out of a bath. His clothes weren't torn or dirty. No scratches, no bug bites, no sign he'd spent 3 nights in the wilderness. He was drawing in the dirt with a stick, intricate patterns that spiraled outward from where he sat. Bill called it in, relief flooding his voice. He approached slowly, speaking softly, the way you do with frightened children. Michael looked up at him, and Bill said, that's when he knew something was wrong. The boy's eyes were different. Not the color, but the way they focused. Too steady, too aware, like an old man staring out from a child's face. Hello, William, Michael said. Not Bill? William, his full name, the one only his mother used. Bill asked if he was hurt, if he was okay. Michael smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't belong on a 7-year-old, and said, I'm better now. They taught me things, important things. The reunion should have been joyous. Marie collapsed to her knees, sobbing, pulling Michael into her arms. Tom kept touching his son's face, his shoulders, checking for injuries that weren't there. But even in those first moments, in the chaos of relief and tears, both parents felt it. The wrongness. The way Michael submitted to their embraces without returning them, patient and still, like he was tolerating the affection of strangers. The medical examinations found nothing. Perfect health, perfect vitals, no dehydration, no hypothermia, no trauma. The doctors couldn't explain it. Michael couldn't or wouldn't explain where he'd been. He spoke in circles, mentioning the tall ones, and the lesson, and the trees that remember. Child psychologists suggested trauma, dissociation, the mind protecting itself from 3 days of terror. They sent him home with his parents and a referral for therapy. That's when the drawing started. Michael had never been particularly artistic before. Stick figures and crayon scribbles, typical kid stuff. Now he drew obsessively, always the same scene with slight variations. Tall figures, impossibly thin, standing between massive trees. In every drawing, they surrounded a small tent. The Henderson family tent, identifiable by the blue rain fly. Always at night, always watching. The figures never had faces, just smooth, elongated heads that seemed to blend into the darkness between the trees. Marie found the first batch under his bed. Dozens of them, some drawn on paper, others scratched into cardboard, one carved into the wooden bed frame with something sharp. She brought them to the therapist, who suggested Michael was processing his fear, externalizing the trauma. But Marie knew her son. These weren't the drawings of a frightened child. They were too precise, too deliberate. They looked like maps. Michael started speaking differently. His vocabulary expanded overnight. Words a 7-year-old shouldn't know, concepts he couldn't have learned. He talked about mycorrhizal networks, about how trees communicate through their roots, about the forest as a single living organism. When Tom asked where he'd learned these things, Michael said simply, "They told me. In the quiet hours." Worse were the things he knew that he shouldn't. He told his mother about her miscarriage from 3 years before, the one she'd never discussed with him. He mentioned his father's brother, Tom's brother, who died in a hiking accident in these same woods 15 years earlier, long before Michael was born. He recited details. The color of the uncle's backpack, the weather that day, the exact location where they'd found the body. Details Tom had never shared with anyone. The night terrors came next, but they weren't like normal nightmares. Michael would sit up in bed, eyes open but unseeing, and speak in a voice that shifted between his own and something deeper, older. He'd recite names of people who'd gone missing in the Cascades over decades. Search and rescue teams would later confirm those names, cases going back to the 1950s. How could a child know them? How could he describe their faces, their last moments, with such clarity? Marie called Bill McKenna 6 months after the rescue. Her voice was thin, stretched tight with exhaustion. She told him Michael wouldn't stop drawing the figures, that he'd started sleepwalking toward the tree line behind their house, that twice she'd found him standing at the edge of the woods in the middle of the night, perfectly still, like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. The last thing she told Bill stayed with him for the rest of his life. She said Michael had told her, calmly, matter-of-factly over breakfast, that he needed to go back soon. That the 3 days weren't finished, that he'd only been loaned back to them. When she asked what he meant, Michael had looked at her with those two old eyes and said, "The woods remember me now, Mom. I'm part of the pattern. They'll call when it's time." Bill urged her to move, to get as far from the Cascades as possible. She promised she would. But 3 weeks later, Michael vanished again. This time from his own bedroom, second floor, windows locked from the inside. They found his drawings scattered across the floor, hundreds of them, covering every surface. All showing the same thing, a boy walking voluntarily into the forest, hand in hand with something tall and thin, walking toward the deep places where the old trees grow. Search parties scoured the woods for weeks. They never found him. Not a trace, not a thread of clothing. Nothing. It was like he'd never existed at all. But here's what keeps me awake at night, what made Bill McKenna retire early and refuse to ever enter those woods again. Other children started drawing the same figures. Kids who'd never met Michael, never heard his story. All across the Pacific Northwest, children visiting the Cascades came home and drew tall, faceless figures standing between trees. Always watching, always waiting. And sometimes, hikers report seeing a boy in the deep woods, maybe 10 or 11 years old now, standing perfectly still among the trees. When they call out, he doesn't respond. He just watches them with eyes that are far too knowing, far too old. And if you get close enough, if you're foolish enough to approach, they say he smiles and whispers the same thing Michael told his mother. "The woods remember you now. You're part of the pattern." So if you're planning to camp in the Cascade Woods, keep your children close. Watch them every second. Because the forest is patient, and it's always listening. And sometimes, when it finds someone who fits the pattern, someone who can hear what it's saying, it doesn't give them back. Not really. Not all the way. There are rules park rangers don't write down. Rules that get passed from one generation to the next in hushed voices during training sessions, over campfires after the tourists leave, in the quiet moments before dawn patrols. The first rule, the one that matters most, is this: never respond to calls for help after sunset in the Cascade Woods. I'm about to tell you why that rule exists, and why I'm the reason they made it official. My name's Jake Brennan. I've been a ranger in these woods for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Bear attacks, lost hikers, broken bones, hypothermia, the usual catalog of wilderness disasters. I prided myself on knowing these trails better than I knew my own neighborhood, on being the guy who could find anyone, anywhere, no matter how deep they'd wandered. That confidence almost got me killed. It was late October, the kind of autumn night where darkness comes early and absolute. I was finishing paperwork at the ranger station when the call came through on the emergency line. A family, the Martins, hadn't returned from a day hike. Their car was still in the parking lot, but the sun had set 2 hours ago. Standard procedure says you wait until morning. That night, searches in dense forest are dangerous and usually futile. But the dispatcher mentioned children, 2 of them, both under 10. That changes everything. That breaks every rule. I grabbed my gear and radioed my partner, David Chen. He'd been a ranger here for 23 years, knew these woods even better than I did. When I told him about the call, there was a pause on the radio. Too long, too heavy. Then his voice came back, careful and measured. "Jake, you know the protocol. We wait for first light." I told him about the kids. Another pause, then, "I'm coming with you. Don't leave without me." We met at the trailhead 30 minutes later. The temperature had dropped hard, our breath misting in the beam of our headlamps. David looked older than usual, the shadows under his eyes deeper. He checked his gear 3 times. Batteries, flares, first aid kit, spare radio, like he was preparing for war, not a simple search and rescue. "Stay close," he said. "And Jake, if you hear someone calling for help, I mean anyone, even if it sounds like those kids, you check with me first before you respond. Understood?" I thought he was being paranoid. The stress of too many years in the backcountry, too many bodies recovered instead of rescued. I nodded anyway, and we started up the trail. The woods felt wrong from the start. You spend enough time in the wilderness, you develop a sense for it. The way animals move, the quality of silence, the weight of the air. Everything was too still. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, no wind moving through the canopy. Our boots crunching on the trail were the only sounds, echoing back to us like the forest was listening. We covered 3 miles without finding any trace of the martens. No dropped items, no footprints off the main trail, nothing. David kept checking his GPS, muttering coordinates under his breath. The deeper we went, the more agitated he became, constantly scanning the tree line with his flashlight. That's when we heard it. A child's voice, thin and terrified, calling out, "Help! Please, someone help us!" Every instinct I had screamed to run toward that voice. But David's hand clamped on my shoulder, his grip iron tight. "Wait," he hissed. "Listen." The voice came again. Same words, same inflection. Exactly the same. Like a recording playing on loop. "Help! Please, someone help us!" I looked at David. His face was pale, jaw clenched. "It's not them," he said. "Keep moving. Don't respond." We continued up the trail, but the voice followed us, always just beyond our lights, always the same desperate plea. My skin crawled. Then a second voice joined, a woman's voice, urgent and panicked. Jake Brennan, we need help, please." It knew my name. The voice knew my name. David pulled me behind a massive Douglas fir, killed his light, and gestured for me to do the same. In the sudden darkness, I could hear him breathing hard, almost hyperventilating. "That's what happened to Marcus," he whispered. 5 years ago. He responded to calls like that. We found him 3 days later, hypothermic, barely conscious. He kept saying something had led him in circles for hours, speaking in his mother's voice. His mother, who'd been dead for 10 years. The voices multiplied. Now there were 4, 5, maybe more, all calling our names, begging for help, promising they were just ahead, just a little further. Some sounded like people I knew, my sister, my old partner from a different district, even my own voice calling back to me from the darkness. David grabbed his radio. "Station, this is Ranger Chen. We have a code black. Repeat, code black." His voice was steady, but his hands shook. The response crackled back immediately. "Copy code black. Abort search, return to station. Do not deviate from marked trail." That's when the temperature plummeted. I'm not talking about a gradual drop. I mean instant, brutal cold that turned our breath to ice and made my fingers go numb inside my gloves. The voices stopped abruptly, replaced by something worse. Footsteps, dozens of them, circling through the underbrush around us, moving in perfect synchronization. David switched his light back on, swept it through the trees. For just a second, less than a heartbeat, his beam caught something between the trunks. Tall, impossibly thin, with too many joints in its limbs. It moved away from the light, but not with the panic of an animal, with purpose, with intelligence. "Run," David said. Not loud, not panicked, just a flat statement of fact. "Run now." We ran. Training, protocol, professional composure, all of it gone in pure animal terror. Behind us, those footsteps matched our pace, never falling behind, never catching up, maintaining distance, playing with us. Then David's voice, but David was running beside me. I could see him, hear his labored breathing, yet his voice called from somewhere ahead. "Jake, this way. I found the trail." David grabbed my arm, pulled me to a stop. "That's not me," he panted. "Keep going straight. Do not follow that voice." The voice that sounded exactly like David called again. Closer now, more insistent. "Jake, I need you to trust me. Come this way. The trail's right here." I looked at the real David. In the beam of his headlamp, I could see absolute terror in his eyes. "It's trying to separate us," he said. "It always tries to separate us." We kept moving, but the forest had changed around us. Trees that should have been familiar looked wrong. Trails branched off in directions I didn't remember. My GPS showed our location, but the terrain didn't match. We were simultaneously exactly where we should be and completely lost. That's when we heard the real voices. Distant, faint, but unmistakably different from the others. The Martins. They were calling for help, genuine human fear in their cries. But they were coming from the wrong direction. Away from the trail, deeper into the forest, where the old growth becomes impenetrable. David looked at me, and in that moment, we both understood the trap. Those things, whatever they were, had found the Martins first. Now they were using the family's real voices to lure us deeper. "We can't," David said, and his voice broke. "Jake, we can't go after them." Every fiber of my being screamed against that decision. But David had been right about everything else. The voices, the cold, the things moving between the trees. So I made the hardest choice of my career. I turned away from those desperate cries and followed David back the way we'd come. The voices, all of them, the mimics and the real ones, followed us for another mile. The temperature didn't rise until we cleared the tree line and saw the lights of the parking lot. The moment we stepped out of the forest, everything stopped. The voices, the footsteps, the presence, like crossing an invisible barrier. We sent in a full team at first light. 20 rangers, search dogs, a helicopter. They found the Martins' campsite 2 miles off trail. Sleeping bags laid out, food still in coolers, no sign of struggle. But no family, no bodies, no trace they'd ever walked away from that site. What they did find were tracks. Hundreds of them, circling the campsite in perfect spirals, getting tighter and tighter until they converged in the center where the family should have been sleeping. The tracks weren't animal, weren't human. Just long, narrow impressions in the soil, like something had dragged itself across the ground on limbs that bent the wrong way. David retired the next week. 23 years of service, and he walked away without explanation. Before he left, he pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. "Those things in the woods, they're old, older than the trees. They've been here longer than we have, and they remember a time when humans knew to fear the dark. Now they're teaching us again. I'm still a ranger. Still do my job. But I follow the rules now, all of them, especially the ones we don't write down. I never respond to calls after dark. I never follow voices I can't verify. And I never, ever go into the deep woods when that particular cold settles over the forest. The kind that comes without wind, without reason. The kind that means something is awake and hunting. The martens are still listed as missing. Sometimes hikers report hearing children's voices calling from the deep woods, always just after sunset. We tell them it's echo or wind or their imagination. We don't tell them the truth, that somewhere in the Cascade woods, there are things that have learned to speak with human voices, that have learned to bait their traps with our own desperation to help, to save, to rescue. And they're always hungry, always patient, always listening for someone who'll break the rules and answer when they call your name in the dark. You ever track something that's tracking you back? I mean really track it. Days of patience, miles of silence, reading sign most people would walk right past. That's what I do. I'm a bow hunter. Been doing it for 23 years in these mountains. I know elk behavior, know their patterns, know how they think. At least I thought I did. Until last November, when I followed one that was smarter than any animal has a right to be. I'd been tracking this bull for 3 days. Massive thing, maybe 6 by 6 points, prints deep enough to tell me he was carrying serious weight. I picked up his trail near Whitetail Ridge, followed it through creek beds and over granite shelves where most elk wouldn't bother going. The strange thing was how deliberate the path seemed. Elk wander, they browse, they zigzag. This one was walking with purpose, almost like it knew exactly where it was headed. The first day, I chalked it up to coincidence. Second day, I started noticing the patterns. The bull would stop at certain trees, always the same type, old-growth Douglas fir with bark scarred in vertical lines, and wait there. I could see where he'd stood, patient and still, sometimes for an hour or more based on the disturbed ground. What was he waiting for? What was he listening to? Third day, early morning, fog so thick I could barely see 20 feet. That's when I realized the bull was leading me. I know how that sounds. But I've tracked hundreds of animals, and they all do the same thing when they know you're following. They bolt, they hide, they change direction to throw you off. This elk did the opposite. It maintained just enough distance to stay out of sight, but left a trail a blind man could follow. Fresh droppings placed in the center of the path. Rubs on trees at exact intervals. It wanted me to follow. That should have been my warning. Should have been the moment I turned around and headed back to my truck. But hunters are stubborn creatures, and I'd invested 3 days into this. I told myself I was overthinking, that exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind. I kept moving. Around noon, the trail led me into a clearing I'd never seen before, and I've hunted these mountains for 2 decades. You don't just stumble onto clearings you've never seen. But there it was. A perfect circle maybe 40 yards across, ringed by trees that grew in 2 straight lines. The grass inside was dead, matted down in spiral patterns that converged on the center. And there, arranged in geometric precision, were bones. Dozens of animal skeletons, deer, elk, smaller creatures I couldn't identify, all positioned with their skulls pointing inward toward a single point in the middle. The bones weren't scattered by scavengers or weathered by seasons. They were clean, white, deliberately placed, like an offering, like a message. My hands went cold inside my gloves. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I found myself walking closer, drawn by a horrible fascination. The patterns weren't random. The skeletons formed concentric circles, each ring a different species, all arranged by size. In the very center was a pile of smaller bones, ribs, vertebrae, finger bones from what might have been raccoons or possums, stacked into a cairn about knee-high. That's when I saw the camera. Trail camera mounted on a tree at the clearing's edge, lens pointed directly at the center. My camera. The same model I use, same camouflage pattern, but I hadn't placed any cameras in this area. I walked over, checked the mount. Fresh. The straps weren't weathered, the battery indicator showed full charge. I popped the SD card, checked the display screen, 347 photos, all taken in the last 72 hours, all of me. I felt my stomach drop. There I was, sleeping in my tent 2 nights ago. There I was, field dressing a grouse I'd caught for dinner. There I was, kneeling by a creek to filter water, completely unaware I was being photographed. The angles were impossible. Some taken from positions I'd checked, places where no camera had been mounted. One photo showed me from directly above, as if something in the trees had been looking straight down at me while I slept. The most recent photo was time-stamped 11 minutes ago. It showed me entering this clearing from the south, bow in hand, looking small and alone among the bones. I spun around, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The forest was silent. That deep, wrong silence that means every living thing has fled. I checked my GPS, marked the location, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My GPS showed I'd been walking in a perfect spiral for the last 3 miles. The trail hadn't led me to this clearing. It had led me in circles around it, tightening with each revolution, until I'd finally reached the center. I heard movement behind me. I turned, arrow nocked, and saw the elk standing at the clearing's edge. He was massive, bigger than his tracks had suggested, his antlers spreading wide enough to span my arm length twice over. But it was his eyes that froze me. They reflected the wrong color, not the normal amber brown of elk eyes, but something paler, almost luminous in the overcast light. The bull didn't run. He stood perfectly still, head lowered, watching me with an intelligence that elk don't possess. Then he did something no wild animal would ever do. He walked forward into the clearing, directly toward me. Not charging, not aggressive. Walking, deliberate, purposeful. I backed away, keeping my bow raised. The bull stopped at the bone cairn in the center, lowered his head. And I swear to you, he nodded. Once, twice, 3 times. Like a person. Like he was showing me something. That's when I saw what was in the cairn. Beneath the animal bones were other items. A hunting knife, blade rusted beyond use. A belt buckle. A boot, rotted and collapsed. A watch, crystal cracked, hands frozen at 3:17. And photographs, dozens of them, scattered among the bones, all showing the same thing. Hunters. Different people, different eras based on the photo quality and clothing. All photographed in this clearing, all standing exactly where I was standing now. All wearing the same expression I could feel on my own face. Confusion, fear, realization. The most recent photograph looked like it had been taken in the 80s, the clothing, the style of the hunting rifle visible in the frame. The hunter in that photo was staring at something off camera, mouth open, eyes wide. Written on the back in faded ink. November 1987. Last photo camera found at clearing. Hunter never recovered. My hands shook as I pulled out my own camera, the one I'd been using to document the hunt. I scrolled through my photos from the last 3 days. Shots of the trail, the elk's prints, the scarred trees. But there, in the background of almost every image, if I zoomed in close enough, was a shape. Tall, bipedal, maintaining distance, but always there. Always watching. The image quality degraded when I tried to focus on it, like it existed just outside the camera's ability to resolve detail. The elk stamped his hoof once. The sound echoed too loud in the stillness. Then he turned and walked away, but not back the way he'd come. He walked to the opposite side of the clearing and stood there, facing outward, blocking that path, like he was saying, "Not that way." I looked at the other gaps in the tree line. 7 openings total, 7 possible exits. The elk had blocked 1. That left 6. I chose one at random, started walking. But before I'd taken 3 steps, I heard movement. Another elk emerged from the trees, smaller, a cow, and positioned herself in front of that exit. Then another bull appeared, blocking a 3rd path. They were herding me. Just like I'd been herding game my entire hunting career, they were controlling my options, limiting my choices, pushing me toward a specific direction. The only path left open was to the north, toward the deepest part of the forest, where the old growth trees blocked out the sun and the GPS signal went sketchy. I ran. Forget pride, forget dignity. I crashed through underbrush, tripped over roots, my bow forgotten in my hand. Behind me, I could hear them, not chasing, but following, maintaining pace. The way a predator follows prey that's already exhausted, already beaten, just waiting for it to collapse. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until I hit a logging road I recognized. The moment my boots touched gravel, the sounds behind me ceased. I looked back. The tree line was empty. No elk, no movement, just the dark spaces between the trunks where anything could be standing, watching, waiting. I made it to my truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove 6 hours straight, didn't stop until I hit city lights and pavement and the blessed noise of traffic and humanity. 2 weeks later, Search and Rescue contacted me. They'd found my trail camera at the clearing, the one I'd discovered, the one with photos of me. They wanted to know if I'd placed it, if I knew anything about the location. They'd been searching the area because another hunter had gone missing. His truck was found at a trailhead, his trail tracked for 3 miles in a perfect spiral, and then nothing. Just a GPS marker at a clearing where bones were arranged in geometric patterns. They sent me the photos from my camera. The last image was time-stamped the day after I'd left. It showed the clearing from the familiar angle, focused on the center. And there, standing where I'd stood, looking at the bone cairn with the same expression of dawning horror, was the missing hunter. But he wasn't alone in the frame. Behind him, just at the edge of focus, was a shape. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. And in its hands, or what might have been hands, was a camera. I haven't been back to those mountains, haven't touched my bow. I sold all my hunting gear, deleted all my photos from that trip except one, the clearest image I captured of the shape that had been following me. I keep it as a reminder that sometimes, when you go into the wild looking for game, you're not the only one hunting. Sometimes the thing you're tracking has already marked you, has already chosen you. And all that's left is to walk the spiral until you reach the center where the bones wait, where the cameras watch, where something patient and ancient collects trophies of its own. If you hunt in the Cascade woods, pay attention to the elk. If they're leading you somewhere, if the trail is too easy to follow, If you find cameras you didn't place, turn around. Because some hunts end with a trophy on your wall, and some hunts end with you becoming part of someone else's collection. And trust me, you don't want to know what's behind the camera when your picture gets taken for the last time. You ever sit down in a place that feels older than memory itself? Where the world grows soft and pulpy, and the quiet seems to hum under your skin. You ever breathe in air so thick with rot and sweetness that you start to wonder if something beneath your boots is feeding, watching, waiting for you to notice it? That was my job, my great dream, really. I'm a field mycologist. I trace fungal networks and log their lives, invisible yet everywhere, all across the Cascade woods. I thought I understood hunger, patience, decay. But nothing prepares you for a hunger that looks up from below and recognizes you. I arrived in mid-September, when the woods were moist but not yet sodden. Prime hunting season for mushrooms. I had a grant, a GPS unit, a battery of reference books. I also had a mission, though my friends called it an obsession. I was mapping the spread of a rare bioluminescent fungus that had been popping up in old-growth forests where soil maps drew blank spaces. My tent squatted beside a log spongy with velvet caps and chicken of the woods. Night fell quickly then, as if the trees wanted privacy. It started on my second morning. A sharp, sweet, almost fruity scent, like a peach rotting in the dark, seeped from the ferns. Nothing in my notes mentioned a smell like that. I lifted moss and leaf litter, tracing the scent to a ridge where wind drew odd patterns through the pines. There, the ground swelled in unnatural mats, pale and almost translucent, veins pulsing beneath the surface. That was the first wrong thing. As a scientist, I gathered samples and wrote everything down. But the forest pressed in. By noon, the air felt thick, heavy, my senses blooming out in all directions. Every step left a damp imprint that oozed brown-green sap around my boots. I started hearing animal rustlings, chipmunks, or maybe mice, darting between exposed mycelium roots. By afternoon, the animals weren't just curious. They seemed unwell. A garter snake lay twitching in the moss, tongue flickering at the air, eyes dull and clouded. Squirrels staggered, as if drunk, claws scraping softly on bark. Ravens circled but didn't land. Everything with fur or feathers seemed skittish or sick, and by dusk I felt it too. A low ache behind my eyes, a fog drifting through my thoughts. Still, I worked late. I laid out petri dishes under the tent's red lamplight, cataloging spore patterns. That's when my field recorder picked up something odd. Soft, rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat, rising from beneath the earth. Too regular to be random, the sound made the hairs on my neck lift. I tried to tell myself it was groundwater shifting, but the rhythm matched my own pulse, beat for beat, until I turned off the recorder and silence snapped back. Thick and total. I tried to sleep. I dreamed of tangled roots strangling my ankles, of darkness breathing in soothing, childlike whispers. No words, just a feeling of welcome and warning at once. When I woke, my tent zipped shut but dusted with a fine white powder, as if it had snowed spores in the night. The air reeked of sweet rot. At breakfast, my eggs tasted off, bitter, metallic, as if the very air was seeping into the food. I wrote it down, but my handwriting stuttered with each faint tremor underfoot. The forest floor was alive, rising and falling ever so slightly, like something far down was stirring, stretching itself after a long sleep. I tried following a line of mycelium with orange flagging tape. After half a mile, the tape was gone, vanished, as if the woods had absorbed it overnight. GPS data glitched, coordinates looping back, or sometimes I'd walk 10 paces, and the numbers wouldn't change at all, like movement in a nightmare. Around noon, I stumbled across a patch of mushrooms I'd never logged before. Tall, meaty, bruising dark purple when I touched the caps. They clustered in a perfect circle, roots tangled together so tightly it looked like a net. When I knocked one over, milk-thick sap oozed out. And the other mushrooms seemed to lean in, almost hungrily, almost as if they resented the loss. That evening, a deer wandered into my camp. Its eyes were milky and unfocused, its movements jerky, uncertain. When I tried to walk up slowly, gently, it staggered away behind a curtain of hanging moss, vanishing without so much as a rustle of leaves. In the distance, I heard a muffled groan, deep and guttural. I never saw the deer again, but a few hours later, I found soft hoofprints outside my tent, circling, as if it, or something, had come back to check on me. I tried to send emails to my supervisor. No signal. My phone buzzed. Notifications looping. Texts from friends received days late. Timestamps scrambled. Sometimes, my own voice would echo back through the static when I checked my voicemails, whispering, "Stay with us," in a cadence I never remembered recording. By the fourth morning, I didn't trust my senses. My hands tingled. Fingertips traced invisible lines in the air. My notes grew frantic, looping, almost poetic. Sentences like, "The fungus is drawing a map," and "My thoughts belong to the network now," scribbled between data on caps and spore color. The sweet, rotten scent grew so strong I gagged. And for a few hours every day, the light changed, turning pale and golden as if filtered through something not quite alive. Then came the memory gaps. I'd zip up my tent for a nap and wake hours later miles away, shoes caked in unfamiliar mud. My water bottle empty, throat sandpaper dry. The last time it happened, I found myself standing at the base of a massive cedar. My forehead pressed against the bark, hands sunk wrist-deep in soft, spongy earth. I pulled free with a wrench, breath heaving, watched my fingers trembling. Something was burrowing in my head. Ideas, colors, a sense of purpose that wasn't mine. I realized what made this network so strange. This wasn't a fungus that lived off death. It was one that altered reality, fed off thought, nostalgia, even fear. The animals went mad, followed invisible paths. I started recognizing patterns, spirals again, arrangements in stone and mushroom clusters. The air buzzed with static when I spoke aloud. My dreams turned vivid and terrifying. A network as vast as the forest, roots connecting every living thing in a chorus of yearning. And I, a new node, sprouting along with the mushrooms. The last night, the earth shook outright. I awoke to find my tent half swallowed by soil, zippers jammed solid with white mycelium. The woods outside pulsed with faint green and blue light. I had to claw my way free, hands throbbing, taste of earth gritty on my tongue. Something beneath the ground whispered in a humming, ancient voice, promising peace, promising knowledge. I ran. My path veered away from logic, thoughts swirling with each step. Each tree seemed to lean, arms outstretched, their bark shot through with veins of pulsing, luminous fungus. I tripped, my palm landing on a cluster of the purple mushrooms. Sap seeped into a cut on my hand. The pain was bright, electric, and the world spun sideways. When I finally reached the logging road, I half crawled, lungs seizing. As soon as my feet hit gravel, the oppressive pressure receded. Colors snapped back to normal. The sweet, rotten scent vanished. I looked at my hands, veins outlined in faint, milky white. Under the surface, something pulsed. matching my heartbeat for a few moments before fading away. Back in town, I checked myself into a clinic. Blood work came back strange but inconclusive. I took a sample of the fungus with me. In the right light, it still glows. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see branching networks. Connections, roots, voices huddled together in the dark, waiting. Sometimes, entire hours slip away, and I come to standing in the yard, palms pressed against the dirt. If you ever walk the Cascade woods and catch a whiff of fruit gone sour, if the ground feels too soft, the silence too eager, and your memories start to shuffle out of order, walk back fast as you can. You may leave with your skin, but if the network wants you, it'll find a way inside. And you'll bring a piece of it home, pulsing under your skin, feeding, waiting for its season to bloom. You know those sounds your brain files under impossible? The ones you can't explain, so you laugh them off later because the alternative would keep you up at night? I teach people how to survive in the Cascade woods, how to build shelter, find water, keep their heads straight. I'm supposed to be the rational one. But there is a tree in those woods that screams like a human being, and once you've heard it, every other noise out here sounds wrong. My name's Eric. I'm a survival instructor, been doing this long enough that the forest feels more familiar than my own living room. I've heard cougars scream like women, owls shriek like children, wind howl through deadfall like a freight train. I know how sound warps in the dark. I also know what I heard that night didn't belong to any animal with bones. It was a 5-person advanced course. 3 guys, 2 women, all in their late 20s, city strong but not wood smart yet. My job was to fix that. We hiked in about 12 miles off the main road, into old growth where the trunks go wide and the canopy eats most of the sky. The air was damp and heavy, pine sweet and mushroom rich. It was late autumn, the kind of cold that waits until you stop moving to sink its teeth into you. We made camp in a shallow basin ringed by massive Douglas firs, one of those spots I'd used a dozen times. Water nearby, natural windbreak, enough downed wood for a decent fire. There was one tree I'd never camped near before, though. It towered over the rest, bark twisted and scarred, like it had survived a dozen lightning strikes. The locals had a nickname for it, I remembered suddenly. The listening tree. I'd always thought that sounded poetic and a little silly. We set up tarps, built a good fire, cooked a simple meal. The group was in that sweet spot. Tired enough to listen, not so tired they made stupid mistakes. We went over night protocols, bear hangs, basic navigation. By the time the fire had settled into a bed of orange coals, everyone was half asleep in their bags, faces flickering in the low light. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I woke with that sharp, electric snap of awareness that something has changed. The fire was down to a dull glow. The sky beyond the tarp was ink black. The usual nocturnal noise, rustles, distant calls, wind, was gone. Dead silence. I've been in quiet woods. This was not that. This was the quiet you get in the moment before glass shatters. Then the tree started screaming. It was low at first. A groan that shivered up from the roots, through the soil, into my bones. Then it rose, higher, louder, until every hair on my body stood on end. Imagine every awful human sound you've ever heard. Sobbing, begging, raw-throated terror, blended and forced through a single throat far too small to hold it. That's what it sounded like. Dozens of voices braided into one. All 5 students bolted upright at the same time, eyes huge, heads snapping toward that massive trunk at the edge of camp. Nobody said a word. Nobody had to. The sound drilled straight past language and into the old part of the brain that only knows two options: run or die. Stay in your bags, I managed, though my own legs were twitching to move. Don't run, don't. A new peak of that scream sliced my words in half. It wasn't coming from the canopy or the branches. It was coming from inside the wood. That's the part my brain still wants to reject. The trunk itself seemed to vibrate, bark shuddering with the force of it. In the dim light, I could see steam or breath, pulsing out of cracks in the bark with each ragged wail. Then the voices separated. Underneath the main scream, distinct words started to form. A man's voice first, rough and panicked, shouting for help. A woman's voice sobbing a name. A child's voice whimpering, "It hurts, it hurts, it hurts," over and over, climbing in pitch until it blended back into that overarching howl. One of my students, Jenna, clapped her hands over her ears and curled in on herself. Another started to scramble out of his bag, wild-eyed. "Stop!" I snapped, louder than I meant. "Listen to me. You run in the dark, you break an ankle. You break an ankle. You don't leave this basin. You understand?" He froze, chest heaving, eyes glittering with reflected firelight. The screaming dulled for a heartbeat, like whoever or whatever was inside that tree was listening. Then it spoke my name. Not screamed. Spoke. Calm. Clear. In a voice that sounded close enough to my dead brother's to make my vision go white for a second. "Eric," it called, from the middle of the trunk. "Eric, please. I can't get out. It's so dark. It's so tight. Help me. You always said you'd help." My brother died in a car accident on dry asphalt, miles from any forest. He'd never even been in these woods. Every survival lesson I've ever taught says the same thing. Reality doesn't bend just because you're scared. But fear makes its own logic. Part of me was already halfway to believing it, halfway to seeing his face pressed behind that bark. I forced myself to move toward the fire instead of the tree, throwing on more wood with shaking hands, chasing the darkness back a few tatters. The light leapt up, painting the bark in wilder relief. That's when I saw the carvings. They'd always been there, I realized dimly. I just hadn't looked closely enough. Names. Dozens of them, climbing the trunk as high as my headlamp could reach. Some were old and weather-softened, letters blurred by time. Others were fresh, cuts still pale and raw. Between the names were dates. The dates matched some of the missing person cases I'd heard rangers mutter about around station coffee. Right next to my shoulder, where the screaming felt loudest, were 7 new names. The most recent one matched a hiker who disappeared 2 months ago. No trace found. Search and rescue had given up after a week. As I watched, a new line began to etch itself into the bark, splintering through the outer layer like something pushing from beneath. The knife doing the carving wasn't visible. The wood itself parted. Letter by letter, a name spelled itself out. Jenna. The girl beside the fire let out a choked sound, half sob, half moan. "Make it stop," she whispered, rocking back and forth. "Please, make it stop. I'll do anything, just make it stop." The chorus inside the tree seized on her words. Dozens of voices repeated them back in perfect unison. "Make it stop. I'll do anything. Just make it stop." They twisted her tone, made it mocking, pleading, hopeful, broken. Then all at once, silence. It cut off like a switch being thrown. No fade, no ragged end. 1 second, the air was vibrating with agony. The next, nothing. The quiet that followed was worse. For a long minute, none of us moved. The fire crackled obscenely loud. My own breathing sounded alien in my ears. "Everyone pack," I said finally, voice hoarse. Now, we're leaving. Headlamps on. You stay within arm's reach of me. If anybody lags, I will drag you. They moved. Shock makes people obedient. Within minutes, we had packs on, bags half stuffed, gear dangling. I didn't care. Weight is fixable. Dead is not. As we skirted the edge of camp, I made the mistake of glancing up at the tree one last time. The names near eye level had changed. My own name was there now, shallow but legible, the cut edges still oozing clear sap. Underneath it, half-formed, first 3 letters carved and waiting for the rest, was Jenna. The bark around those lines pulsed faintly, as if something beneath it was still pressing, still writing. I didn't tell her. What good would it have done, except to seed a terror so deep she'd never sleep again? We hiked out in a tight knot, headlamps carving shaky tunnels through the dark. The forest around us stayed unnaturally still for a long time. No night sounds, no branches shifting, just the scuff of our boots and the ragged drag of our breathing. About a mile from camp, the woods exhaled. Crickets started their high, thin song. An owl hooted, exactly the way an owl is supposed to. The air warmed a fraction. The trail looked normal again, just dirt and roots and rock. Behind us, faint as the memory of a cry, the tree let out one last sound. Not a scream this time. A sigh. Relieved. Patient. Like something that had added new names to a list. It knew it would finish eventually. I filed the incident report when we got back to the station. Left out the impossible parts. Wrote about unidentified animal distress vocalizations, client panic response, decision to evacuate early. The other rangers glanced at the location on the form, then looked away quickly. One of the older guys clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "You camped near the big one, huh?" "Locals call it the screaming tree," he added quietly, when the others were out of earshot. "We try not to put groups near there. People hear things, see their own names sometimes. Easiest way to handle it is to pretend it's just a story." I still teach in those woods, still walk past that basin on the topo map and steer a little wide. But some nights, when the wind hits my apartment windows just right, there's a note under the howl that makes my gut clench. A thread that sounds like someone trapped on the other side of the glass, wearing my brother's voice, my student's words, my own name. If you're ever deep in the Cascades, and you find a massive, scarred fir ringed with unnatural quiet, if the bark is covered in names and one of them looks almost like yours, don't touch it. Don't speak near it. And when the screaming starts, no matter whose voice you think you hear inside, do not answer. Trees aren't supposed to remember us. That one does. And it's still adding lines. There's a tree in the Cascade woods that shouldn't exist. I don't mean rare. I don't mean endangered. I mean, it doesn't fit the reality the rest of the forest obeys. People who find it never forget it. Some come back changed. Others don't come back at all. I found it once, and for 3 nights afterward, I heard my name coming from inside the bark. Let me start at the beginning. I was part of a wilderness therapy group. 8 college kids dealing with various flavors of burnout, anxiety, depression. The kind of program where you're supposed to reconnect with nature and find yourself. We'd been hiking for 4 days, journaling by firelight, doing trust exercises that felt forced but weren't entirely useless. I was starting to feel better, starting to believe the brochure promises. On the 5th morning, our guide, Sam, mid-30s, the kind of weathered calm you only get from years in the backcountry, told us we had a solo day. Each of us would pick a direction, hike 2 hours out, and spend the afternoon alone. Reflection time. No phones, no partners, just us and the trees. I chose east. The trail thinned quickly, turning to game paths, and then nothing. I liked it that way. Fewer boot prints meant fewer people meant more quiet. By noon, I was deep enough that the canopy blocked most of the sky. The air smelled like wet bark and moss, clean and old at the same time. That's when I saw it. The tree stood in a small clearing, but calling it a clearing doesn't do it justice. The ground around it was bare, not overgrown, not burned, just empty. Smooth dirt, almost polished. And the tree itself was massive. A Douglas fir, maybe, but wrong. The bark was too dark, almost black, and it had a texture like scar tissue. The trunk was easily 12 feet across, wider than any tree I'd seen in these woods. But it was the carvings that stopped me cold. Names. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, carved into the bark from ground level to as high as I could see. Not fresh. Some were so old the bark had grown over them, leaving only faint impressions. Others looked recent, the wood still pale where the knife had cut. I stepped closer, running my fingers over the nearest ones. Jonathan, 1952. Mary, 1978. Help, 2003. Please, 2011. They weren't all names. Some were dates, some were just numbers, or symbols I didn't recognize. And some were pleas, desperate single words scratched deep. The deeper I looked, the more unsettling the patterns became. Several names were repeated, the same name carved a dozen times, dates spreading across decades. I took out my phone to get a photo, even though I knew there was no signal out here. Through the camera screen, the tree looked different, darker. The carvings seemed to shift, rearranging themselves. I blinked, looked with my bare eyes, normal again. Looked through the phone, wrong again. I put the phone away. My hands were shaking. That's when I noticed the silence. Not peaceful, not natural. The entire forest had stopped breathing. No birds, no insects. Even the wind had died. The only sound was my own pulse hammering in my ears. I should have left. Every instinct said run. But there was something magnetic about the tree, something that made my feet stick to the ground. I found myself walking closer, circling the trunk, reading more names. Some I recognized, not personally, but from news articles, missing persons reports I'd seen online over the years. Hikers who'd vanished in the Cascades, a couple from the 80s, a teenager from the 90s. And then I saw my own name. Not my full name, but close enough. Emma J., 2025. Today's year. My first name and middle initial. Carved at eye level, the wood around it still fresh, sap beating at the edges. My breath caught. I touched it. The carving was warm, like living skin. That's when I heard it. A voice. My voice. Coming from inside the tree. Emma, it whispered. Muffled and distant. Like someone calling from the bottom of a well. Emma, are you there? I jerked my hand back, stumbling. The voice continued, patient and calm. I've been waiting. I knew you'd come. Everyone comes eventually. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked tight. The voice, my voice, sounded so reasonable, so familiar, like listening to a recording of myself, but stripped of all emotion. You should stay, it said. You should add your name properly, all the way. Stay with us. It's peaceful here. No more anxiety, no more doubt. Just rest. I ran. Crashed through underbrush, tripped over roots, didn't look back. The voice followed me for what felt like miles, always just behind, always whispering in that calm, dead version of my own tone. Come back, Emma. You know you want to. You know how tired you are. When I finally burst back into camp, gasping and wild-eyed, Sam took one look at me and went pale. "You found it," he said quietly. Not a question. I nodded, unable to speak. He sat me down, got me water, waited until my breathing slowed. Then he told me the truth. The tree was why he led groups here, not to help us find ourselves, to see who it would call. Every group, someone found the tree, every single time. And every person who found it heard their own voice. Most came back like I did. Some didn't. He showed me a list, names and dates. People who'd gone missing from his groups over the years, 7 of them. The program kept running, kept bringing people out here because, and this is the part that made my blood run cold, the families never blamed them. Every missing person left behind a note, found in their tent or their journal, saying they'd decided to stay, that they'd found peace, that they didn't want to be found. And the handwriting was always their own, but the wording was identical across all 7 notes. I should have closed the program years ago, Sam admitted. But I keep thinking if I understand it, if I figure out what the tree wants, I can stop it. I left the next morning. Didn't finish the program. Didn't say goodbye to the others. Just packed my bag and hiked out to the trailhead where my parents picked me up. For 3 nights afterward, I heard my name. Always around 3 in the morning. A whisper from the walls, from the heating vents, from the space between my heartbeat and my breath. My own voice calling me back. "Emma, we're not finished. You carved your name. That means you belong to us now." On the 4th night, it stopped. But I still feel it sometimes. A pull, like a hand on my shoulder, gentle and insistent. Sometimes I'll be driving and realize I've turned toward the mountains without deciding to. Sometimes I'll wake up with dirt under my nails and no memory of going outside. I looked up the tree once, tried to find information. There's nothing official. But if you dig deep enough into forums and obscure hiking blogs, you find stories, dozens of them. People who found a tree covered in names. People who heard themselves calling from inside the bark. Most of the accounts end the same way. "I'm going back. I need to finish carving my name." I've fought the urge for 2 years, but it's getting harder. The voice is quieter now, but more persuasive. It doesn't demand anymore. It just reminds me how tired I am, how much easier it would be to stop fighting, how peaceful the forest was, how my name is already there, waiting to be completed. I'm writing this down because I don't know how much longer I can resist. If you ever find a tree covered in names, don't touch it. Don't read the carvings. And for God's sake, don't look for your own name. Because once the tree knows you, once it's spoken in your voice, it doesn't let go. It just waits. Patient, knowing that eventually you'll come back to finish what you started. You ever notice how some jobs sound peaceful from the outside, but the people doing them look 10 years older than their age? Fire lookout is one of those. Everyone pictures a quiet tower, long sunsets, coffee, a pair of binoculars, and a radio that barely crackles. Nobody imagines what it feels like to be the highest, loneliest thing for miles when the woods decide they're tired of being watched. My name's Aaron. I spent one summer alone in a tower deep in the Cascade woods, part of an old network the state barely maintains anymore. It was supposed to be easy money before grad school. 3 months of solitude, reading, maybe writing, nothing more demanding than scanning tree lines for smoke. When they flew me in by chopper that first day, I felt lucky, like I'd cheated the system and won. The tower was a narrow skeleton of steel and wood perched on a ridge, a single-room cabin up top with glass on all sides. Inside, a cot, a wood stove, a table, a two-burner propane stove, a weather radio, and the Osborne firefinder in the middle like some altar. The circular map with sighting wires used to pinpoint smoke. Everything smelled like old paper and dust and a little bit of mouse. Below me, the forest rolled away in every direction. Layers and layers of trees until distance turned them to blue haze. The first week was exactly what I'd hoped for. I read through half the books I'd brought. I logged cloud cover and wind speed. I brewed coffee just to have something to do with my hands. At night, I'd sit with the lights off and watch the stars through the glass, feeling that pleasant kind of small that city people pay for in meditation apps. The first strange thing was small enough that I almost shrugged it off. Around the end of week 1, I woke up just before dawn to the sound of rattling glass. Not loud, just a faint, rhythmic ticking, like someone drumming fingernails on a window pane from outside. The wind was dead. No storm, no branches close enough to scratch. I lay there, heart picking up speed, counting the taps. 4 on the east-facing window. Pause. 4 on the south. Pause. 4 on the west. By the time I convinced myself it was thermal expansion or some other boring explanation, it stopped. The forest looked normal in the gray light. I made coffee with hands that wouldn't quite stop trembling. Day 10, I spotted my first figure. That's what the report would later call it. Figures. At the time, I tried not to call it anything at all. Late afternoon, sun low, air thick with distant haze from fires states away. I was doing a routine scan with the binoculars, sweeping from north to east, when I saw a shape between the trees in a valley maybe half a mile away. Human height, human width, not moving. Just there. No color, no detail. Just the unmistakable vertical of something standing upright among the mess of trunks. My brain ticked through the possibilities. Camper, poacher, another ranger. I watched for a full minute, waiting for some natural motion. A step, a scratch, anything. When the wind shifted, the branches around it moved. The figure didn't. Not 1 millimeter. I blinked hard, eyes stinging. When I looked again, it was gone. I told myself it had been a snag, a dead tree trunk, a trick of light. I wrote nothing in the log. Writing it down would make it real. And alone up there, reality is something you guard fiercely. 2 nights later, I stopped guarding anything. I woke just after midnight. No reason, no dreams, no thunder. Just that strange internal jolt like someone had whispered my name an inch from my ear. The tower was dark. I'd shut off every light to keep the glass from turning to mirrors. Outside, the forest lay in a soft, moonlit spill. Something was breathing on the stairs. I don't know how else to describe it. I could hear every rung of the ladder up the tower vibrate just slightly, as if bearing a careful weight. No footsteps, just the tiniest creak of old metal and the slow, patient sound of someone exhaling, then inhaling. Not animal fast, not panning. Human pacing. Calm. My mouth went dry. I slid one hand out of the sleeping bag, reaching for the flashlight on the crate beside the cot. The breathing grew a shade louder. Whoever it was, they were close now. Halfway up, maybe 3/4. 100 tiny groans of aged bolts carried through the structure. I held my breath and listened. One more exhale. Another. Then nothing. The silence hit so hard my ears rang. I snapped on the flashlight and swept it around the cabin, then toward the trap door in the floor. Still bolted from the inside, the only way up. No shadow under the frame, no hint of movement. My heart felt like it might vibrate a screw loose. I spent the rest of that night sitting upright, back against the wall, light in my lap, listening to nothing and waiting for something. Morning came pale and slow. The forest yawned and stretched and pretended none of it had happened. I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep paralysis, a stress dream. Anything was better than accepting that something had climbed halfway to my door and then disappeared. The radio crackled that afternoon with the usual check-in. Lookout 2, this is dispatch. Status? Lookout 2, all clear. Visibility 12 miles, no smoke. You sleeping okay up there, Aaron? The question jarred me. Yeah, fine. Why? A pause. Just checking. Some folks report strange noises their first couple weeks. The tower plays tricks. I almost asked, what kind of tricks? But I didn't, because the part of me that still felt like a rational adult didn't want an answer that might match what I'd heard. So I just said, copy that, and went back to pretending. The third week broke me. It was around 3 a.m., that time when even the owls get tired. I was half asleep, hovering in that foggy space between dreaming and waking, when my radio clicked on by itself. Not the usual squawk and voice, just a click, then another, then a long stretch of static. I rolled over and squinted at the unit sitting on the table. The power light glowed steadily. Nobody had called me. I reached for it and froze. Through the static, faint but clear, came my own voice. Lookout 2, all clear. Visibility 12 miles, no smoke. The same words I'd said earlier that day, played back in my tone, my cadence. Then the click again, then my voice from the day before. A routine check-in, different conditions, same bland professionalism. The radio was replaying me. I watched the speaker like it might grow teeth. The static hopped again. Dispatch, do you copy? My voice asked from some previous day. Then, without a break, without the little click that always comes before transmission, another version of my voice layered over it. Quieter, breathier. Aaron, let us in. My throat closed. The room felt too small. The windows too large. The quiet version of me kept talking, almost soothing. You're so tired. Your eyes hurt. Your head aches. You've been watching so long. Let us watch for a while. Just open the door, just for a second. I grabbed the radio and shut it off. The static died, but the echo of my own not-quite voice kept bouncing around my skull. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every time my eyelids sagged, I jerked back awake, certain that if I slipped under, the bolt on the trap door would quietly turn itself. The next day, I found the first set of recordings. I hadn't set the tower's old tape deck for anything but the occasional weather bulletin. But when I opened the cabinet below the main console, the light from my headlamp fell on a stack of labeled cassette tapes. Black marker, neat handwriting, dates going back years. Lookout log, 2013. Incident, do not erase. Voices, sample. My hands shook as I pushed one into the deck. The tape whirred, clicked, and then a stranger's voice filled the little cabin. This is Lookout 2, July 17th. Third report. Voices started again around 2300 hours. Sounds like me. Same phrasing. They're getting better at it. Whoever finds this, don't answer if you hear yourself. It's not you. His breathing sped up on the recording. In the background, faint and warbly through whatever ancient microphone he'd used, I could hear a second voice. It sounded almost identical to his. Calm, coaxing. You can't do this forever, that quieter self said. You can't stay awake forever. Let us in. We'll help. He stopped the tape abruptly there. The remaining cassettes were worse. Fragmented logs, half sentences, long stretches of quiet punctured by tapping on glass and distant, overlapping versions of the same man repeating "all clear" until the words lost meaning. There were no tapes for August, no resignation letter in the file drawer, just a gap. I called dispatch. "Hey, did something happen to the previous lookout?" I tried to sound casual. I found some of his tapes. Another pause, the kind I was starting to hate. "Why do you ask?" "He sounds rattled on them, that's all." "He left early?" Dispatch said finally. "No incident report. No forwarding address? Some people aren't cut out for that much quiet." "Sure. Quiet." That night, I shut off the radio, unplugged the tape deck, turned my cot so I could see the trapdoor even half asleep. It didn't matter. Around 2 a.m., someone climbed the stairs. This time, there were footsteps. Soft, careful, but unmistakable. The metal frame hummed under each step. The breathing was back too, but closer, more numerous, like several chests rising and falling in time. I lay rigid, barely daring to blink, staring at the bolts on the trapdoor. They shivered as more weight moved onto the small landing directly beneath it. Then, a knock. Gentle, polite almost. 3 taps that made the whole hatch thud. "Aaron," my voice called from the other side of the wood. Cheerful, professional. "Lookout 2, this is dispatch. Radio check." Silence pressed in, waiting. I didn't move. "Aaron?" The voice tried again, a shade less friendly. "You're not answering your radio. That's against protocol." The bolts trembled, as if something was testing them, not with brute force, but with the slow, patient insistence of roots pushing through rock. "Open up," another voice added. It sounded like my mother. Then a childhood friend. Then my own voice again, raw and exhausted. "Please, man, you're so tired. Let us watch. Just sleep." I don't know how long that went on. Time folds strangely when all you're doing is listening to wood and steel hold back madness. Eventually the knock stopped. The breathing receded. The tower settled, inch by inch, back into silence. At dawn, the world looked ordinary again. The ridge, the trees, a hawk circling, not caring about the tiny human box on stilts. On my last day up there, yes, I left early too. I did one thing the previous lookout hadn't. I made my own tape. I spoke directly into the microphone, voice hoarse but steady. "If you're listening to this in the same tower, and you've heard what I've heard, get out," I said. "Call it a mental health issue. Call it unfit for duty. Whatever you have to tell them. But leave. Because it's not just watching for smoke down there. It's watching you, learning you. One day it's going to guess the right thing to say in your voice. And when it does, you'll open the door." I left the tape in the deck. I didn't label it. They offered me a post the next summer. Different tower, they said. Safer, closer to a road. I told them no. Sometimes, when it's very late and I'm very tired, I hear static in ordinary sounds. The hum of my fridge. The white noise of my laptop fan. Under it all, faint as a breath on glass, my own voice saying, "All clear. Visibility 12 miles. No smoke." And I get that feeling again. That I'm too high up, too alone, too visible in all the wrong ways. Like somewhere far away, in a little box of glass and wood. Something is still circling my tower, still knocking, still trying my name out in different tones until it finds the one that will make me answer. You know those stories your family tells that sound like superstition until the day you realize they were instructions? That's where this starts. Not with the woods, not with a monster, but with my grandmother sitting at a kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, telling me in a voice that brooked no argument. In the Cascade woods, there are days that don't belong to you. On those days, you stay out. I thought she meant bad weather. Storms, landslides, something we could see coming. I didn't understand she meant time itself. She called them the hollow days, the thin days, the days between seasons when the forest forgets what month it is and something older than calendars comes to the surface. When I was a kid, she listed them off with the same cadence she used for grocery lists. Late March, when the snow is mostly gone but the cold isn't. Late September, when the heat has died but the frost hasn't claimed the grass. Those edges, the in-betweens. Mark them. Avoid them. Of course I ignored her. Or I thought I did. But if you grow up with warnings like that, they burrow into you. They become background processes, always humming. Fast forward. I'm 28, working in the city, sleep-deprived and brittle, scrolling through photos of a cabin in the Cascades that someone at work is subletting for cheap. 3 days alone. No emails, no traffic. Just trees and the sound of my own breath. It felt less like a choice and more like gravity. I checked the dates. Late September. The exact kind of in-between my grandmother had told me to avoid. I remember pausing, hand hovering over the keyboard. Her voice stepping up out of memory. Some days don't belong to you. Then my rational brain laughed it off, called it folklore, called it anxiety dressed up as magic. I booked it anyway. The first day was almost offensively peaceful. The cabin sat in a clearing, old but solid, roof sagging just enough to have character. The air smelled like damp earth and fir needles and wood smoke from whoever had rented the place before me. I made tea on the gas stove. I stood on the warped front steps and watched the light fade between the trunks. The forest felt big, but not hostile. Not yet. Inside, the cabin was simple. One main room, a cast-iron stove, a table, a narrow bed, and a wall of old photographs in mismatched frames. Black and white shots of loggers with axes, families in stiff Sunday clothes. A group of men in ranger uniforms from the 1950s. No one had labeled them. They looked out over my shoulder as I walked past, eyes frozen in sepia. I slept hard that night. No nightmares, no whispers, just dark. The second morning, the air had changed. Not the temperature, it was still cool, that almost fall chill. But the weight of it, heavier in the lungs, damp in a way the weather app hadn't predicted. When I opened the door, a low, soft fog hugged the ground, barely up to my knees, clinging to the bases of trees like it was afraid to rise any higher. I made coffee, pulled on a jacket, and walked to the edge of the clearing. The woods beyond looked normal enough. Ferns, trunks, a trail, faint but there, leading deeper in. I heard my grandmother's voice again. On hollow days, the paths go strange. I should have listened. I stepped over the first root anyway. The forest swallowed the clearing behind me like a door easing shut. One moment I could still see the cabin roof through the trees. The next, it was gone. Just more gray-brown verticals and moss and fog. I told myself that was normal. Terrain, angles. I'm not a child. I kept going. The trail under my boots was soft and dark, almost black with moisture. My steps made no sound, not even the usual crunch of twigs. The quiet was the first thing that really unnerved me. No birds, no wind, not even the faraway rush of a stream. Just me and the faint brush of my jacket when I moved my arms. I walked maybe 15 minutes before I noticed the first wrong thing. A stump, waist-high, sheared clean decades ago, moss tufting its edges. On its flat top, someone had arranged stones in a ring, 11 of them. Each stone had been carved, or worn, into a smooth, perfect oval. In the center of the ring lay a single dried-out maple leaf, too crisp and orange for the surrounding green. "My grandmother would hate this," I said under my breath, because sometimes you talk to the air when the silence is too big. Little altars, little invitations. My voice sounded swallowed. It didn't echo. It didn't feel like it belonged to me. I told myself not to touch the stones. I did a slow circle around the stump, cataloging details like I was going to report back to her later. The way no moss grew on top, the way no needles had fallen inside the ring. The forest's floor was chaos everywhere but there. There, it looked curated. I kept walking. Here's the part that's hard to explain without you thinking I'm exaggerating. Distance stopped behaving. I'd walk what felt like 100 meters and glance back to find that stump still visible between the trunks, like it had followed me. Or I'd fix my eyes on a particular tree ahead, a big cedar with a lightning scar. And no matter how long I walked, it stayed the same size, just out of reach. I checked my watch. 10:37. I checked again what felt like an hour later. 10:41. The pressure behind my eyes built like a migraine. The fog thickened, then thinned, then pooled again, with no regard for slopes or hollows. I wasn't breathing hard, but my chest felt tight, like the air didn't want to be in me. That's when I heard the first whisper. Not words. Not yet. Just a tone, brushing the edge of hearing. A murmur where there should have been wind. I stopped, turned in a full circle, heart thudding steadily against my ribs. Hello. Stupid. Saying it made me more afraid somehow. The sound of my own voice felt like throwing something fragile into deep water. The murmur ceased instantly, the way a conversation cuts off when you enter a room. The silence after felt thicker, more intent. I kept walking because what else was there to do? Go deeper, find a landmark, find a slope, find anything that made sense. The forest between the Cascade ridges is old. Trees grow on old stumps, roots twist over older roots. You expect a certain kind of visual chaos. So when I started seeing symmetry, I knew I was in trouble. 2 firs, same height, flanking the path like gateposts. 4 stones at equal intervals beside the trail. 3 fallen logs, parallel, each the same distance apart. Patterns. Not random, not natural. "You're in thin time," my grandmother had said once, her thumb tracing the rim of her mug. Those are the hours the old stories walk around in their own skin. They like edges. They like patterns. I felt like something behind my eyes clicked into a new alignment. The fear sharpened from vague unease to focused understanding. This wasn't just me being lost. The woods were presenting themselves differently, testing what I would notice. "Okay," I said softly, more to her memory than to myself. "Okay, I get it. You warned me. I'm done. I'm going back now." I turned around. The trail behind me was gone. No, not gone. That would have been mercy. It was there, but wrong. Wider, darker, the roots and stones rearranged. The trees on either side leaned a fraction closer together, their branches knitting overhead like fingers lacing. The clearing where I'd started was nowhere in sight. When I took one step in that direction, the whispering came back, louder. This time it had shape, not English, not any language I recognized. But there was rhythm, structure, the feeling of words. The smart thing, the survival handbook thing, would be to stay put, make noise, wait for rescue. But nobody knew I was out here. I hadn't told anyone about the cabin except the colleague I'd rented it from. No cell signal, no radio. If the forest wanted to hold me, it could. I chose a third direction at random. Not forward, not back. Sideways, cutting across the invisible lines the patterns were trying to draw. With every step, the air grew colder. Not crisp, not high mountain cold. Wet cold, basement cold. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes your joints ache. My breath started to fog, even though the day's temperature shouldn't have allowed it. The whispering followed. Sometimes it sounded ahead of me, sometimes at my back, sometimes right by my ear. Once, clear as a bell, it twisted into my grandmother's voice. "Child," she said from somewhere over my shoulder, the way she had on nights she caught me sneaking out. "You're walking on someone else's hour. You need to leave it how you found it." I froze. The urge to turn around, to see her, to throw myself into that familiar sound was so strong it unstrung my knees. But even in that moment, some leftover shard of her teachings held. "Things wear skins that don't belong to them," she'd said. "Voices, too. If a dead loved one calls you into the dark, you keep walking toward the light." I kept my eyes forward. I didn't look. "I'm sorry," I said aloud. My voice cracked. "I was stupid. I get it now. I'm leaving. Please let me leave." The forest doesn't nod. It doesn't say, "All right then." But something shifted. The cold eased. The smell of damp earth rose stronger, more real. The whispering thinned from a crowd to a few scattered threads. Ahead, between the trunks, I saw brightness. Not much, just a lighter shade of gray, but enough to send a rush of weak, grateful adrenaline through me. Clearing, it had to be. I walked faster, not running. Running in the woods gets you twisted ankles and broken ribs, but pushing my stride, counting my steps like they were a spell. 37, 38, 39. The trees broke. I stepped into the clearing behind the cabin. From the wrong direction. I stood there, swaying a little, staring. The cabin looked the way I'd left it. Same sagging roof, same crooked stovepipe. But I was on the far side now, facing the back door I hadn't used. The front steps where I'd sipped tea that morning were across the clearing, exactly opposite where they should have been if I'd truly turned around the way I thought. My watch read 10:47. I'd been gone. 15 minutes. My clothes were damp, my fingers numb, my throat raw from whispering apologies. In that short walk, the woods had taken me somewhere sideways. Somewhere that looked like my world, smelt like my world, but didn't line up right. And then, for whatever reason, they'd set me back down where I started. I didn't argue with the reprieve. I went inside. I locked the door. I packed. On the table by the bed, where there had been nothing before, lay a single object I hadn't brought. A dried maple leaf, crisp, perfectly orange, edges intact. It sat in the exact center of the wood, no stray dust around it. Underneath, faint enough I only saw it when the light hit just right, someone had scratched a word into the tabletop with something sharp. Returned. I left that afternoon, hours earlier than planned. The forest watched me go, trunks unmoving, branches still. No voices, no whispers, no cold. Just the normal, everyday weight of old trees and older soil. Back in the city, I checked the calendar. The day I'd walked into the woods, the day the fog hugged the ground and the air turned thick. was one of my grandmother's marked days, the equinox, the exact hinge between summer and fall. I lit a candle on my counter that night and apologized out loud to a woman who wasn't there. I thanked her, too, because something in those woods had listened to her words long enough to let me go when I finally repeated them. If you ever find yourself in the Cascade forests on a day where the light feels too heavy and the air sits wrong in your lungs, if your watch starts lying to you and the paths begin to mirror themselves, if you hear a familiar voice drift out of the trees at just the right pitch to break your heart, remember this. Not every day in the woods belongs to you. Some hours have other owners. And if you step into a hollow day by mistake, don't make yourself at home. Don't follow patterns. Don't answer voices that sound like you're dead. Turn sideways. Walk back. Leave the hour how you found it. If you're lucky, the forest will hand you back. If not, your name might be waiting there already. Carved somewhere just outside the world, you know, on a day the calendar never admits existed. Let me start this one a little differently. Forget the woods for a second. Forget creatures, voices, shadows between the trees. Imagine you come home, dump your gear, plug in your SD card, and realize your entire life in the forest has been shot from angles you never set up, like something out there was filming you back. That was my last season as a wildlife photographer in the Cascades. I've been doing this work for 30 years. I know how cameras behave when they glitch. I know the look of corrupted files, timestamps gone wild, GPS hiccups when satellites drop. This wasn't that. This was precise, intentional. Like whoever or whatever was behind the lens knew exactly what they were doing. It started with a routine check. I'd spent 4 days in the Cascade woods tracking a bull-elk migration, setting out a line of trail cams along a game corridor I've used for years. Same models, same positions. One at waist height near a salt lick, one angled low along a stream crossing, one high in a fir to catch predators cruising the edge. I could have drawn that setup from memory. The trip itself was uneventful. Too uneventful, if you want the truth. The animals were scarce. No bears on the berry slopes, no cats on the ridge lines. The kind of quiet that doesn't make sense in a healthy forest. I told myself it was timing, bad luck. I still swapped cards every morning, talking to the cams out of habit. "Let's see what you've seen for me," I'd mutter, palm on the plastic housing like a pat on the shoulder. On the last night, I remember waking up once in the dark with a distinct, sharp sensation of being watched. Not the vague paranoia you get the first time you sleep under thin nylon, but a focused, pinpoint awareness, like someone standing a few feet away was waiting for me to open my eyes. The tent was zipped, the night was still, and I was too tired to indulge it. I rolled over and let the sound of the creek drag me back down. Back home, I made coffee, sat at my desk, and started the familiar ritual. SD card in, folders open, thumbnails populating the screen. A small comfort, seeing the grid fill, deer here, a fox there. Shots of the same tree line as light shifted through the day. Then I hit the folder from the camera on the far ridge and felt my stomach drop. The first image was of me. Not a selfie, not a reflection. Me, walking along the trail, head turned toward something out of frame. The shot was sharp, well framed. My entire body centered. The metadata said it had been taken at 3:12 a.m. on the second night. I was asleep at 3:12 a.m. on the second night. My chair creaked as I leaned in. The angle was wrong for any of my cameras. Slightly elevated, off to the side, about 10 meters from where I remembered placing the ridge cam. The background showed my tent, faintly visible through the trees. I clicked to the next image. Another of me, this time bending to tie my boot. Timestamp, 03:1:14 a.m. Same night. The beam of my headlamp cut across the frame, but my eyes were dull, unfocused. Sleepwalking, maybe. I've never done that in my life. Next image. Me standing utterly still, head tilted like I was listening. Mouth slightly open, arms limp at my sides. Timestamp, 03:1:16. The fourth image took longer to resolve. A heavy, raw file dragging its feet onto the screen. When it finally appeared, my throat went dry. Me again, but closer. Too close. Whoever had taken it had been standing less than 2 meters away. The detail was obscene. Pores, stubble, the crinkle of my sleeping bag jacket. My eyes were wide this time, pupils blown. And there, reflected as twin smudges in my irises, were two pale shapes, like hands, holding something up to my face. I yanked the card out like it had burned me. My heart thudded in my chest, beating a little too fast for a man just sitting at a desk. For a few minutes, I just sat there, listening to my own breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I convinced myself it was a prank. Had to be. Some hunter, some bored kids, someone who'd found my cameras and decided to mess with me. That explanation felt thin, even as I grabbed the next SD card and jammed it into the reader. Second card. Different corridor. Same story. The first dozen images were normal. Elk in flashes of motion. A cougar's tail cutting across the bottom edge. Raccoons blur crawling over moss. Then, again, there I was. This time sleeping in my bag. The tent door unzipped, the camera positioned at ground level just outside, lens peeking in. Flash off. Exposure long enough to capture every line on my relaxed face. Timestamp, 02:47 a.m. on night 3. I checked my field notes. At 21:30 that night, I'd written zipped in, temps dropping, creak louder. At 05:10, I'd written woke up to light rain. No mention of getting up. No waking memory of unzipping, stepping out, lying down in the open for a stranger's camera. Or, worse, no memory of someone else unzipping my tent while I slept. The images went on. Me drinking from my canteen by the stream, shot from across the water where no cam had been placed. Me stepping behind a tree to take a leak, framed too high for any ground-mounted unit. Me walking with my pack slung over one shoulder, head turned toward something over my right shoulder that was never caught in the frame. I opened the metadata window on one of the shots and felt the world tilt a little. The GPS coordinates were there. Only, there were 3 sets. 3 locations listed under 3 different fields, all standard tags, but somehow simultaneously populated. One put the camera exactly where I'd mounted it 2 days before. The second placed it a full mile away, in a section of the forest I hadn't visited that trip. The third set of coordinates didn't make sense at all. Latitude and longitude numbers that didn't correspond to any place on Earth. The timestamps overlapped too. One photo marked SO253 had another image, clearly taken from a different angle, marked SO253 SO4. The same second, different perspective, as if more than one device had been shooting the same moment from multiple locations. I don't know how long I sat there, flipping through those files. The light outside shifted from morning to a washed-out afternoon without me noticing. It wasn't just that there were photos I hadn't taken. It was that there were photos I knew were impossible. One folder, deep in the directory, had no date label. Just a string of characters that meant nothing at first glance. I opened it and felt something in me recoil like a startled animal. No animals. No landscapes. Every frame was me. Not recent shots, These were older, years older. Different jackets, a younger face. One image had me with a beard I'd only worn for a single season almost a decade back. Another showed a hat I'd lost 5 years ago, holding it in my hands, turning it like I was trying to remember when I'd bought it. The backgrounds changed, different valleys, different ridgelines. But the composition stayed eerily consistent. Always at a slight distance. Always at just the right height to see my face clearly. Never close enough that I could have reached out and touched whoever or whatever was holding the camera. I checked the timestamps on that folder. Some were from seasons I remembered. Some were from dates I'd never been in the woods at all. One was from a year my right leg had been in a cast, when I'd spent 6 months on my couch, bitching about daytime TV. Another was from next spring, 10 months in the future. 04:23 a.m. My face older by a fraction, a new scar along my jaw I didn't have yet. The angle was looking down on me as I slept in a tent I'd never seen, under a ridgeline I couldn't place. The camera had a calendar of me that included days I hadn't lived. At that point, I did what any rational, seasoned professional would do. I lost it. I deleted everything, every folder, every shot. Dragged, dropped, emptied the trash, watched the progress bar inch along while my heart hammered against the inside of my ribs. My hand hovered over the SD card in the reader. For a second, I considered snapping it in half. Instead, I ejected it, drove back out to the Cascades, and hurled that tiny slice of plastic into the deepest part of the river I could safely reach. The sound it made hitting the water was pathetic, insufficient. For a few weeks, I pretended that was the end of it. I told myself I'd been overtired, that maybe the timestamps had glitched, the GPS data had corrupted. I'd made no backups. In a world addicted to documenting everything, I chose to let this vanish. Then, one night, I woke up in my apartment with the absolute certainty that there was a flash in the room. Not lightning, too contained, too local. I sat up, heart racing, staring into the dark. The afterimage of that square, white burst floated in my vision, burned into the backs of my eyes. My phone was on the nightstand, screen black, no notifications. I picked it up anyway, thumbed to the camera roll. The newest image was time-stamped 3:12 a.m., 2 minutes earlier. It was a photo of me, sleeping. The angle was wrong for a selfie, too far back, too high. The framing perfect, centered, flattering in the way good portraits are. Behind me, in the dark, just at the edge where the grain started to eat detail, 2 pale shapes flanked my bed, elongated and indistinct. Like hands, like someone holding a device up to their face, mirroring the shot I was looking at. I stared at that image until the screen dimmed and locked. When I opened it again, the photo was gone. No glitch, no corrupted file icon, just gone, like it had never existed. I've changed locks since. I've moved apartments. I've avoided the Cascades. I stopped using trail cams altogether. Now I work with long lenses in open spaces where nothing can get behind me without kicking up dust. But sometimes, when I plug a card into my computer, there's a stutter in the reader. A little pause, a feeling like the machine is checking in with something else before it shows me what I asked for. And every now and then, in the corner of a shot where no one was standing, there's a blur. At first I thought it was lens flare, then motion blur, then just my age catching up with me, hands not as steady as they used to be. Now, I'm not so sure. So if you're out in the Cascade woods someday and you find a camera that isn't yours, strapped to a tree at just about your shoulder height, with a card inside full of pictures of you from angles you don't remember anyone standing at. Don't bring it home. Don't plug it in just to see. Leave it there. Walk away. Because whatever's been documenting you is very patient. It has years of your face saved somewhere, in formats you don't recognize, from days you haven't had yet. And the only thing worse than realizing you've been watched for a very long time is realizing someone out there has already seen how your story ends. You ever meet someone on a trail and feel, right away, that something about them doesn't fit the day you're standing in? Not danger, not creepiness. Just that quiet, wrong note feeling, like the song of the world skipped a beat when they appeared. That's how this started. Not with a scream or a monster, but with a man in a faded red windbreaker who seemed to know the Cascade woods a little too well. I was a section hiker on the Pacific Crest Trail, working my way through Washington in chunks. You know the type. Not a through hiker, but pretending for a week at a time. It was late season, mist clinging to the trees, first dustings of snow in the shaded gullies. Most of the northbound crowd was long gone. The trail felt emptied out, stripped down to the essentials. Me, my pack, the dirt path, and the endless breathing green of the Cascades. The day I met him, the sky had that flat, white look that makes time slippery. I'd been alone for hours. My thoughts had gone soft around the edges, slipping between memories and plans and the endless next step. I rounded a bend lined with dripping ferns and nearly walked straight into him. He was standing right in the middle of the trail, not hunched over his feet like tired hikers do, not fiddling with gear, just standing, upright, like he'd been placed there. "Sorry," I laughed, stepping back to give us both space. "Didn't hear you coming?" He smiled. That's what hooked me at first, his smile. Not toothy, not strained, just gentle. Familiar in a way I couldn't place. Like the way your grandfather smiles at you in old photos. "No worries," he said. His voice was low, calm. "You headed north or south?" "North," I said automatically. "Well, trying. You?" He tipped his head, glancing up the corridor of trees. "North," he said. "Always north." That answer didn't ping as strange until later. At the time, I just nodded, shifting my pack straps. We fell into step without saying we would, boots matching pace over roots and rocks. Hikers do that sometimes. You match speed and fall into a little temporary companionship, then peel off when camp calls. "What's your name?" he asked after a minute or two. I gave it. "You?" He smiled again, a little more rueful this time. "Most people on this stretch just call me Miles," he said, "on account of I've done it a few times." "Through hiker?" I asked. He hesitated, just a beat. "Something like that," he said. We walked. The forest around us shifted through its moods. Darker patches where the canopy nodded. Sudden openings where light spilled across sword ferns and salal. He moved easily, like his body knew every rock before it appeared. No trekking poles, no GPS. His pack was old, the kind with leather tabs, patched in a dozen places. His clothes didn't match any of the newer technical lines I recognized. It took a while for my brain to flag that. "How far are you going?" he asked, sidestepping a muddy spot without looking down. "Just to the next road crossing," I said. "Week off work, you know." He nodded. "Nice stretch," he said. "If the weather holds. You camp at Hemlock Saddle last night?" I had. I hadn't mentioned it. "Yeah," I said slowly. "You see my tent?" He shook his head. "Saw your boot prints," he said. "You drag your left heel a little when you're tired." A hint of a smile. "You've been more tired lately." The way he said that, like he knew more than my gait, sent a small chill down my spine. I laughed it off, because that's what you do when something feels off and you don't want to admit it. "Trail'll do that," I said. "You through'd this year, or?" "Not this year," he said. "I've walked this section more times than I can count, though." His eyes flicked up through the trees to where the ridgelines vanished into cloud. Start to forget where one year ends and the next starts. We came to a viewpoint after a while. One of those sudden breaks where the world drops away and you see the Cascades layered in front of you like torn paper. Blue and gray and green. I stepped over to the edge, breathing in the cold air, watching a lone hawk wheeling in the distance. When I turned back, he was watching me instead of the view. "How far back do you remember?" he asked. I frowned. "On trail?" "In general," he said. "Last few days, say." I opened my mouth to answer, then paused. It should have been an easy question. I'd started this section 3 days ago. I remembered the bus ride to the trailhead. I remembered the first night's camp, burning my tongue on instant noodles, reading the names in the shelter log. I remembered the wind in the trees last night, the way it had sounded almost like words if I let my mind drift. But when I tried to piece the days together, they slid. I could recall flashes. A fallen tree we'd had to climb, a creek crossing with a slick log, the feeling of my hip belt biting into bone. The order blurred. The start point slipped sideways. "I remember enough," I said, more defensively than I meant to. He nodded like that was about what he'd expected. "You notice how this stretch feels longer than the map says?" he asked casually. "Like you've been walking 6 hours and your GPS insists it's only been 3? I had noticed that. I hadn't wanted to dwell on it. The days felt thick here, stretched like taffy. My watch would insist only 40 minutes had passed since I last checked, when my exhaustion swore it had been 2 hours. "Comes with the territory," I said, trying for lightness I didn't feel. "Trail brain." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. That's one name for it. We started walking again. After a while, the conversation drifted into lighter things. Gear, food preferences, the eternal filter versus purification tablet debate. He listened more than he talked, but when he did speak up, he had little details that didn't belong to him. "Swap that shoulder strap to the other notch," he suggested at one point. "It's digging into the spot you injured years ago. The muscle there never quite healed right." I hadn't told him about the car accident. I hadn't told him about the month in physical therapy, about the way that shoulder still ached in cold weather. "How do you know that?" I asked quietly. He tilted his head, considering, like he was debating how honest to be. "Walk long enough with someone, you start to see where they hurt," he said finally, "even if they don't remember why." That made a kind of sense, in a poetic way. But my skin prickled under my pack straps. We stopped for water at a small stream sliding over mossy rocks. I knelt, scooping and filtering, watching the swirl of debris disappear into my bottle. He stood on the opposite bank, looking downstream. "You know you've walked this bit before," he said. I looked up. "I told you this is my first time doing Washington." "Not this year," he said. "Not this life, if you want to get fancy about it. But you've walked it. Most of us have." He glanced back at me and saw how that landed. "Sorry," he added. "I forget how that sounds when you're newer." "Newer to what?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to think he wasn't going to answer. Ever get the feeling the trail doesn't always lead where you think? He said at last. That there are places it loops? Not on the map. Not in a way the rangers can fix with a reroute. Just little pockets where people fall in and have a hard time finding the exit. I thought of the days blurring, the watch lying, the way my dreams on trail had started to feel like memories instead of fantasy. You're saying we're in one of those pockets now? I tried to keep it joking. It came out thin. He didn't smile this time. I'm saying you've been on this stretch of trail for longer than you think. I opened my mouth to argue, closed it, scrubbed back through my memories, really forcing myself this time. I could picture last night's campsite, the night before. Then, a blank stretch of green, trees layering into each other, steps without number, a kind of tired that felt bigger than 3 days. How long have you been out? I asked. The question tasted like something important. He looked up at the canopy, eyes tracing branches. Once upon a time, he said slowly. I started at the Mexican border like everybody else. I had a start date, a plan, people following my blog. I used to count the days, the miles, the calories. And now? I pressed. He chuckled, but there was nothing amused in it. Now I know these 30 miles of Cascade forest better than I know my own birthday. Because as far as I can tell, this is all I walk, over and over. Different weather, different company, same ground underfoot. My mouth went dry. You can't leave? Everyone can leave, he said. Eventually. Some of us just take longer to find the turnoff. I looked around us. Trees, ferns, trail. The same view I'd seen all day, all week. My heart started to thud faster, a dull percussion in my ears. Why me? I asked, and that was the honest question thumbtacking itself to my tongue. Why are you talking like this to me? He studied me for a moment. There was no menace in it. Just a kind of tired kindness. Because you're starting to lose track, he said gently. And I remember what that feels like. And because someone did the same for me once. A pause. Didn't take, obviously. But maybe it'll take for you. Cold slid through my chest. What did they tell you? I asked. He smiled without humor. They told me, when you meet someone on this stretch who knows too much about you, don't keep walking with them. He looked down at his worn boots. I didn't listen. I was lonely. The trail can be like that, can't it? Makes you grab at any voice that sounds kind. My hand clenched around my trekking pole. So, what happens if I keep walking with you? He shrugged. Maybe nothing. Maybe you just have a nice conversation and camp together and part ways in the morning. His eyes met mine. They were so tired. Or maybe, next time you try to remember where you started, you'll find it just out of reach. You'll know you came from somewhere with jobs and rent and car payments. But it'll feel like a show you watched once, not a life you lived. The wind shifted. For the first time all day, I felt it. Cold and sharp, threading through the trees with a sound like distant traffic. For half a second, I could almost hear a city. My city. Horns, voices, a siren Dopplering away. And then it was gone again, swallowed by the hush of the Cascades. How do I leave? I asked, voice low. He pointed with his chin, not his hand, down trail. There's a junction ahead, he said. Barely a game path. Most people don't see it. If you take it, it'll feel wrong. Too steep at first. Too muddy. You'll think you made a mistake. You'll want to come back up to the main trail where it's easy. Don't. And if I miss it? He hesitated. Then maybe you meet me again, he said. In a day or a year, or whatever passes for that in here. I'll still be in this jacket. You'll still be in that one. We'll say we're headed north, always north. My throat tightened. Why don't you take it? I asked. He smiled, and this time the sadness in it was a weight. I think I did, he said quietly. Once, a long time ago. But some of us, we bring the trail with us. He shook his head lightly, as if shaking off a thought. Besides, someone has to stand here and point it out. Otherwise, it keeps the ones who aren't meant to stay. We walked in silence after that. The trees closed in, needles whispering overhead. I watched the ground like my life depended on it. When the junction came, I almost missed it. Just a faint, narrow line veering off between two cedars, half swallowed by ferns. No sign, no cairn. The kind of thing you dismiss as an animal trail without thinking twice. Is that... I started. He stopped, didn't look at it, looked at me. This is where I turn around, he said. I stared at him. You could come with me, I blurted. You could try again. He shook his head, that same old tired smile on his lips. Trail's got my name too deep in it now, he said. You still have somewhere to go back to. Faces that would notice if you didn't show up. I thought of my apartment. My coworker who joked about me going full feral. My mother promising to keep an eye on my location pings. All of it felt distant, but not unreachable. Not yet. How will I know it worked? I asked. You'll start to remember stupid things, he said. Bills you forgot to pay, emails you meant to answer, the taste of bad office coffee. Annoyance is a good sign. Means the world out there still has its hooks in you. We stood there, the trail between us, the junction at my back. It was good walking with you, he said softly. For what it's worth. You too, I said, and meant it. I turned onto the narrow path before I could second-guess myself. The ground sloped sharply, mud sucking at my boots. Within 10 steps, my thighs burned. Branches whipped my arms. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong, that I was leaving the safety of the known line. Behind me, his voice floated through the trees one last time. Hey, he called. I stopped, half-turned. I couldn't see him anymore. Just layers of trunks. If you make it out, do me a favor. Yeah? I croaked. Next time you're on a trail and you meet someone who feels stuck, talk to them, he said, just in case. You never know which way the path is running for someone. I wanted to answer, but my throat closed. I took another step downhill, and another. For a while, the forest fought me. Brambles snagged, rocks shifted, slopes undercut my footing. Then slowly, the angle eased. The undergrowth thinned. The sound of a road, not loud but present, threaded in around the edges of birdsong. When I stumbled out at a small, unmarked trailhead with 2 cars and a faded information board, my watch said only an hour had passed since I'd met him. My phone, when I powered it on, buzzed like a trapped insect. 23 missed notifications. A text from my mother. Half panicked. You're 3 days overdue to check in. Call me now. 3 days. I still hike. I still love the Cascades. But every time I pass someone on a trail and they smile with that gentle, too familiar kindness, a little part of me goes cold. I check my watch more often now. I pay attention when the days feel too long or the miles don't add up. And if you ever find yourself on a stretch of trail that feels endless, with a stranger who knows a little too much about you and can't quite say how long they've been walking, do yourself a favor. Take the hard turn when you see it. Because some people get out of the Cascade woods and carry only memories and scars. Others get woven into the trail itself, walking the same 30 miles over and over, waiting to warn the next hiker who's just starting to forget where they came from.